Hello, so today we turn our attention to the Marxists, so our next theory. So if you remember last lesson we looked at functionalism and now we need to remind ourselves of Marxism and figure out how it links to education. So what I'd like to do, much like you did last lesson with the functionalists, just press pause in a moment and just try to remind yourself what Marxists think about society, what they think about the family and who are the key Marxists on the family. Okay, so what do they think about society? So if you remember, essentially they believe society is split into two groups. The proletariat, in other words, the workers, and the bourgeoisie, in other words, the owners of business, the bosses, and so on. And what they believe is the bourgeoisie exploit the proletariat. So the proletariat do all the work, and no matter how hard they work, the people benefiting from their hard work is actually the owners and the bosses and the sort of the captains of industry, if you like, and they are exploiting these workers. So if you remember, the Marxists aren't big fans of the family. They are particularly not big fans of the nuclear family. What they believe is that the nuclear family serves the interests of this capitalist system because they keep the workers ready for their next day of work. They provide what they call a cushion. So in other words, what happens is the worker goes to work, he does his working day, he comes home, his family cushion him so that he is prepared, ready for his next day. So he goes home, he relaxes, he has his meal, he sits and reads the paper or he watches TV, chills out, and he's ready for his next day of work. And by doing this, Marxists say family is propping up or cushioning the capitalist system and they don't like it. And of course, what's also happening is the family is producing new babies, new children, who are going to be the consumers of the future. Again, buying into this capitalist system by buying all the stuff, the trainers, the mobile phones, the fast food, etc., etc. So by and large, Marxists are not fans of the family. Key Marxist on the family that I would remember if I were you would be Eli Zaretsky. He is the one that talks about this cushion, this idea of the family propping up the capitalist system. So what we need to consider though now is what is the Marxist opinion on education? So please put a title, that, and your date into your books. Thank you. So a few bits we need to just write down now. So the Marxist opinion towards education. So remember, we talked about initially functionalists being a consensus theory. And Marxists, we talked about last lesson, are conflict. So they believe that groups in society are in conflict. And they also don't see the education system as positive. They argue the education system is controlled by the upper classes and benefits them more because it teaches upper class values. Remember back to Pierre Bourdieu. So Pierre Bourdieu is a Marxist sociologist, and he's the one that talked about this cultural capital. The fact that schools are very middle class and that those people who have cultural capital, so they go to the museums and they go to theatres and so on and so forth, they have the cultural capital to survive best and succeed best in school, and the working class miss out. So Marxists in general say that upper class children succeed and get top jobs, whereas lower class children do not succeed and they get lesser jobs. So in other words, society carries on with the pattern it always had. The rich do well and the less rich do less well and get the lower jobs and stay in their bracket, if you like, as working class. This continues the unequal society that Marxists we know are against. So we just mentioned Pierre Bourdieu and we covered him in the earlier lessons when we looked at social class. And the other key Marxist sociologists on education are a pair called Bowles and Gintis. So we're going to look at them on the next few slides. So a side heading for you now, what is Bowles and Gintis' opinion on education? It's important to note they were working in 1976, so things have changed, but we know that in sociology, a lot of the things that we're studying are from sort of the late 1970s, 80s, 90s, and so on. There are more recent studies, but we do need to know what was going on and what was being said at this time. So, Bowles and Gintis argue schools create a workforce that benefits a capitalist society. And even though that's 1976, it is what Marxists still feel now. So how do you think schools might achieve that? So think about capitalism, think about the relationship between teachers and students, think about what goes on in schools, and just jot down, take a few moments to press pause and jot down how you think schools might create a workforce. Think about the things we say to you about preparing for the world of work. So then we need to think about how we think schools and work are similar. So think about, again, what we say about preparing you. So think about the rules, relationships, our reward system and so on. How does that compare with the workplace? What rules do we have perhaps in school that you can imagine you'll also have once you are working? Some important notes for you to just jot down. Bowles and Gintis studied 237 students in New York. So this is American. And they used other studies to complete their research. So they also did some secondary research by looking at what other sociologists had found out. They argued that schools create obedient and unimaginative students. And they called this correspondence theory, and that needs to be added into your glossary. So their study or their findings are referred to as correspondence theory. And it's this idea that there is a correspondence, a similarity between what's expected in school and what's expected in the world of work. So the things that you do and are expected of you in school are the same as in work. So when we talk to you about things like being punctual, wearing the correct uniform, being respectful, having your equipment, those are the same sorts of things that you would be expected to be doing in the workplace. So what Bowles and Gintis are saying is that we as a school are preparing people to be the proletariat, to be the workers. And of course, they're not, as Marxists, going to think that is okay. So how? How does it happen? I've given you a few little examples there. They talk again about this hidden curriculum. So how else would the correspondence theory, do you think, show that schools prepare workers, proletariat, for the workplace through the hidden curriculums? Not the formal lessons, not by learning your maths and learning your English, but how does it work through the hidden curriculum? Have a little think before we have a look at this. Okay, so I talked already about students learn to obey rules without questioning them. Students learn to accept hierarchy, so you learn to do what the teachers are telling you to do. You learn to do as you're told by the people above you. You learn to be motivated by rewards, so we talked to you about getting your target grades, but also about getting the various rewards, praise points, Hot Choc Friday. All of those sorts of things are about us rewarding you, what's called external motivation. You work to get the rewards. And that's the same thing they say in the workplace. Workers don't work because they love their job. They work because they get paid at the end of the week. And then also students learn to be competitive. So you want to get the best grades. You want to do the best you can. And that's the same as in school. People go for their jobs, and 2 or 3 or 10 or 15 people go for a job, and obviously you're competing for the better job. It's not about equality, is what they say. So you just need to jot down those things as the ways in which they say that school is the same as work, and in fact therefore prepares people to be workers. And when they're talking about school being the same as work, they are talking about school preparing you to be the proletariat. It's important then to think here about meritocracy. When we did the functionalist lesson, we talked about this idea of meritocracy. And indeed, the whole really comprehensive system is based around meritocracy. This idea that if you work hard, you'll do well. And it's something we say to you all the time, isn't it? Work hard, you'll do well. You'll gain, you'll get the good jobs, you'll get to university, you'll get the financial benefits, you'll get the feel-good factor of having a job that you enjoy and that challenges you. Anyone can do well as long as they work. That's this idea of meritocracy. But you've got to have a think about whether you think the Marxists would say that that actually does exist. Make sure that you've got meritocracy put into your glossary, but then have a think about it. So Marxists are going to say that meritocracy is a myth. It doesn't exist, because they would say that although we're led to believe that education is equal and fair, they say it's not, and that actually it's based on social class. So it goes back again to what Pierre Bourdieu was saying about cultural capital and the fact that schools are set up for the middle classes. And they also say that actually the top jobs tend to go to the higher classes. And they talk even more about private schools, the fact that those people who already are doing well in society and have money go to the private schools and then get the better jobs. It's this idea of jobs for the boys, this idea that sometimes it's not what you know, but who you know. And they therefore say that meritocracy is a myth and it doesn't exist. Take a moment to jot those things down and just get your heads around it as well. So finally, we need to think about, we talked about what their opinion is towards education, but what are the criticisms around it? Because we can't just decide that because we're learning about Marxism, they must be right, and then when we look at functionalism, they must be right. We know that they all have criticisms around them. And we know that some of the criticisms about functionalism are basically all about the fact that functionalism see everything as perfectly positive and everything in the garden is rosy. But what do we think about the criticisms of Marxism, and in particular of Bowles and Gintis? So firstly, we need to think about the fact that if we're talking about schools creating obedient people who are going to follow and do as they're told and therefore are going to be good workers, actually not all students are like that. I'm sure you can think of some for yourself that actually don't follow the rules. They don't just sit there like little robots doing as they're told. So some of the criticisms are in fact that Marxists are wrong to talk about people becoming obedient workers, because some don't do that and some students reject school. And also, if students obey the rules and don't act creatively, actually that doesn't really work for the workplace, because a lot of jobs require workers to be imaginative and think for themselves and have initiative. And if you're just sort of robotically following the rules, that's not actually creating what workplaces really do need and want. So, just something for you to have a think about before we do the next lesson. How similar are functionalists and Marxists' opinions about the role of education, about schools being similar to society, about this idea of meritocracy, and about the attitude of students towards schools? Just have a think about those things and we'll address them next lesson. Thank you.